Hey guys, how's it going? Kripp here. Today I want to talk about and give you guys my analysis on the best cards in Arena that came from the Old Gods expansion. And, we've had a little bit of practice. There's been some statistics done by a few websites that kind of influences our opinions, and we have a pretty good idea about what's good from this expansion. Now, to put things into a little bit of context, the common cards, even though they're not the best cards, are the most important ones because you find them so frequently. So people are going to be asking, what's the best class? How do these influence the classes? Generally, if it is a common card, that's going to be seen a lot. If it is a class card, it's going to be seen twice as much as that. Class cards are offered twice as much as non-class cards in Arena. And on top of that, whatever the new expansion is, it has an occurrence boost. I believe in this expansion it is plus 50%. So you're going to see a neutral common from the Whispers of the Old Gods 50% more than you'll see a specific neutral common from another set. So without further ado, I want to get kicking off here with the neutral commons. These are the big ones. We have the Bog Creeper. This guy is almost as good as the previous grand champion of neutral commons, the Kraken. I think in some decks it is better than the Kraken, but not in all the decks. It kind of depends on the class. There are some classes that already have a lot of tempo plays, already have a lot of swing states, and it just doesn't really matter to have an additional damage from the Kraken. So in those cases, the Bog Creeper is better. I'm kind of talking about like Rogue. So Rogue, you're mostly going to lose in late game if your opponent can just have some burst on you because you probably took a lot of damage using your Hero Powers weapon. And Taunt stops him from winning, so you can just finish him off. That's why Bog Creeper is probably a lot more powerful than Kraken for Rogue. But when you consider like Druid has other taunts. It doesn't really matter if they cost 7 or 8 mana, or if they have 8 or 9. It just doesn't really matter that much. What matters is Druid has some really slow stuff, and it really needs the tempo. It doesn't have any tempo accelerants. It doesn't have anything close to what Rogue has on the tools for tempo. If your opponent plays a big minion and you're a Druid, you actually have to play a big minion to kill his big minion. And that becomes a big problem when your big minions get hard removed by like 3 and 4 mana cost cards. So that's why Bog Creeper is a lot worse than Kraken in that case. So, it kind of depends on the class, but they're both extremely good cards, and to have something even near the value of Kraken offered in the common slot in a new expansion, that's a pretty big deal. So that means a lot of people are going to have this as a tool, and you can expect and probably should consider playing around or setting up your board for a Bog Creeper to be hitting the board from your opponent's side. The other superpower common card released is the Nerubian Prophet. The Prophet has seen some constructed play, but mostly in like the Evolved Shaman decks that abuse the fact that it costs 6 mana, kind of. But in Arena, it's just a really good card. In Arena, the cards aren't quite on the same power level as they are in Constructed, so if you just keep Nerubian Prophet in your opening hand, you're playing a 4-4 for 3 mana on turn 3, or you're playing like a 4-4 for 2 mana on turn 4. It's usually one of those cases. You can save the card until it costs like 0 mana for a late stage in the game. I have seen that a little bit, but that's not very common. But what this means is you can expect to be facing a Hero Power plus a 4-4 or a 2-drop plus a 4-4 on your opponent's 4th turn against you, or you can expect a lot of 4-4 minions on the 3rd turn, which means, playing like a 2-3 if you're going second without the coin might suck a lot because you might be facing down a Nerubian Prophet. Now, on the rare side, we had Corrupted Healbot. I want to mention this card because it's somewhat influential. It's a rare card, so you're not going to see it that often, and it's not as good as the other common cards, but it's still pretty good. You're going to see some situations where Corrupted Healbot is going to swing away a game, as it's just a super high stat 5-drop. It doesn't really matter that it has like 8-8 or 7-7 or 6-6 in most cases. Usually you play a 4-drop, your opponent plays a 5-drop, the 5-drop is Corrupted Healbot, the Corrupted Healbot kills the 4-drop and has like 2 health left, so it kills another card afterward. And that trade makes the card pretty damn good. The heal effect is very bad if you're playing a rushdown deck, but if you're playing like a Zoo style or a control deck, it's generally irrelevant, and it makes the card very powerful as a whole. So you can give the card a try because it is deceptively good. Now, most of the really powerful cards are class cards in the Whispers of the Old God expansion. Starting off with the mage, you have Faceless Summoner. This guy is ridiculous. Now, I thought originally it wouldn't be that good because I've noticed that the big minions are more important. So if I play like a 7/7 and you play a 6/6, 7/7 is so much stronger than a 6/6. So Faceless Summoner is a late game card because it costs more than 5 mana. It's a late game card. But it's probably going to die to any one of your opponent's big minions. Now, what I didn't consider is that people are just not playing big minions. Generally, people are playing more and more discover value multi-cards or inspired value generating cards. The play your biggest minion type of guy thing doesn't really happen that much anymore. And when it does, because you're playing mage, you can just use a removal on it. So because you're removing anything of that size, Faceless Summoner, even though it's not a great late game card, it still has that functionality where you can force the situation where it still bullies some lower drops, plus you get the other guy. And yeah, that makes it a pretty insane card overall. You should probably be picking this card over almost anything if you're playing mage. A Light in the Darkness is another one of those deceptively good cards. I covered it in a video a little bit ago. It's just one of those things where you can just get a super big guy. So even if you're getting like a 6-drop, the fact that it's getting +1/+1 makes it so it's probably bigger than your opponent's 6-drop. So you would play a Light in the Darkness instead of like a 6, 7, or 8-drop in your deck in terms of curving out. And, well, it's kind of better than that, because if you have absolutely nothing to play, you can just play this guy. And even on like turn 4, you can get like a 2-drop with +1/+1. It'll kind of keep you in the game. So it's very much like some of the very powerful Inspire minions, where they're very strong in the late game, and they're often good enough to play on curve, even though you're not getting maximum use out of them. Rallying Blade, another super powerful paladin card. 3 is like the new magic number for damage. So many of the new cards and so many of the old cards that are seeing a lot of play, at least in Constructed, die to exactly 3 damage. And Arena follows suit in a similar way. Definitely not as absolute as that, but definitely lots of 3 health minions are popping up, and Rallying Blade I think will often have a higher impact than True Silver. But it is a rare, so you're not going to see it quite as much. Then we have Shadow Strike. Shadow Strike is a really powerful card. You guys have seen in some of the Constructed Rogue decks that I've played, I've actually substituted out Eviscerate for Shadow Strike. Now, I don't think Shadow Strike is quite as good as Eviscerate. I do think it's roughly the same. The main thing with Eviscerate, especially in an arena deck, it allows you to play different styles of decks. So, you know, if you're starting the draft, you get like a whatever rare, and then your next card is either Eviscerate or Shadow Strike, you should pick Eviscerate, because you don't know what kind of deck that you're playing at that point. You might be playing a face or aggro rogue, in which case Eviscerate is way better than Shadow Strike. But if you're at a stage in the draft where you know you're playing a mid-range or control rogue, I think you could actually make the call to pick Shadow Strike. Shadow Strike is a more effective and a more consistent way to remove a minion than Eviscerate is, and if you're playing a deck that is like Zoo-like or Control-like, the fact that you can do a little bit of extra face damage when you need it might not really be all that valuable. So it's quite good that Rogue gets such a powerful card in the common slot. But it doesn't really stop there. They also get the South Sea Squid Face. Now, this card is not rated as highly as I would have rated it, but I've had maybe a little bit of biased experience playing the card in Constructed. In Constructed, the Squid Face is an amazing card. Generally, you don't feel bad for not having any other weapon buffs, and in Arena, weapon buffs are really huge. Often, a 4-mana 4/4 is good enough. It'll just trade with their 4-drop, and getting this extra ability is a very powerful notion, and it being a pirate does actually matter a little bit. There are some pirate synergistic cards out there, so you definitely can try the card. It's not on the same power level as some of the other superpower rogue cards, but I think it might approach that once people realize how to use it properly. So then we have the Shaman cards, the Flame Wreathed Faceless. Turns out 4-mana 7/7s. Pretty good, guys. It's a pretty good card. The reason why it's pretty good is because the other 4-mana cards have a lot less stats, and stats are really important. So the card is really good. Really good. I mean, you compare this to, like, I guess, Fell Reaver. Honestly, like half of my 12-in runs since the expansion came out, I got on the back of Fell Reaver. And Shamans just get a ton of Fell Reavers in their deck all the time when they draft. So that's a pretty big deal. Shaman still struggles from a lot of the same things they did in the past, where they just have no board control, and what they play just doesn't really matter that much. But this card comes a long way to helping fix that. Shaman's also got the Master of Evolution. Both evolution effects are very powerful in Arena, but the Master of Evolution is particularly powerful because, well, Yeti's a good card in Arena, and you basically have that with Master of Evolution with no ability, plus you have the ability, which you guys know is super powerful, because if you play any of the old gods, you've known how much fun and how strong the evolutionary effects can be. So, no surprise, this is probably the best Shaman rare out there. Then we have Hammer of Twilight. Hammer of Twilight, I think, is also just about the best weapon that Shaman has available. It is in the Epic slot. You're not going to see it too much, but when you do see it, I highly encourage you guys to pick it, as, the 4 damage even later in the game makes a really big difference. Getting the extra minion, getting the burst tempo on the second weapon hit, huge stuff. Excellent card. Moving on to Warriors. Warriors got a ton of help. Now, the first card is N'Zoth's First Mate. I don't really agree this card is very good, but I wanted to voice this as most people think this card is really ridiculously good, and there's a few stats to back that up. The idea is you play this on turn 1, it'll almost always trade for a 1 and a 2-drop, I guess, and that's really good. The reason why I am a little bit of a skeptic is I've never played against a warrior at High Winds who played this card against me. And usually, the people who you play at High Winds are absolutely carried by the cards that they have. The few times I have seen the guy, it's played early, it does okay, it usually trades for a 1-drop, sometimes not even a 2-drop, and then they usually just overwrite the weapon with another weapon. So I haven't seen it perform up to par, but again, my experience is pretty limited. But Ravaging Ghoul, I have seen this card perform, and this card is amazing. I think it might be the best warrior common released in the set, and maybe one of just the best commons out there right now. It seems that people in Arena really like to bully warrior and keep all their minions at 1 health and trade favorably, and the Ghoul just reverses that. People are still not giving warriors credit for having whirlwind effects, and Ravaging Ghoul is better than that because you also get the minion. And that's a pretty big deal when it comes to value, arena, tempo, and just everything in the game. So the card is ridiculous. You probably should pick every single Ravaging Ghoul except for maybe one of the big choice common warrior weapons. Maybe that's about it. I think it's the best minion, at least, that you can get in the common slot on a warrior. Then we have a Bloodhoof Brave. This card is surprisingly good from what I've heard. At least. It is really good and constructed where you can combo it with a lot of the effects. I thought it might be a little bit weak, but at the same time, I've noticed that cards like Gurubashi Berserker are surprisingly strong now because so many people are just trying to zerg you down with super small minions, particularly like Warlocks and Paladins, and there's a lot of those in Arena, so I imagine Bloodhoof Brave does the same thing and just completely crushes people who do that, and it averages out as a pretty good card because even in a bad situation, it's still 6 health worth of taunt for 4 mana, which is pretty good. Now, moving on to the less relevant but kind of fun to talk about cards, Call the Wild is probably the single best spell in the entire game now. It's almost on Dr. Boom level. It's just really good. But again, it's an epic card, it's a Hunter card. Not many people are going to play Hunter because Hunter, I haven't really mentioned any of their cards in the list. It's because they didn't really get any. It's because Hunters kind of suck in Arena. But they got this one, but it's an epic. So you're not going to see it too frequently, but when you do, don't be surprised that you're going to get absolutely destroyed by the Hunter who plays it. So that's what's going on. And to follow up, I wanted to leave you guys with these are stats from Hearth Arena. Hearth Arena does like the rating tier systems and that kind of stuff. And, they like to share stats with me privately. And they wanted to mention that there's a chance that there is a card that is now the new reigning king of all the best cards in Arena. Previous to this, it was Muster for Battle. Muster for Battle was better than all the legendaries. It was better than absolutely every single other card, and that's pretty obvious. Muster for Battle is just insane. You get to win the early game, period. It doesn't always work out because sometimes your opponent plays nothing in the early game and just starts playing 4 and 5 mana guys, and in that situation, Muster for Battle is not great, but that situation generally doesn't happen. Usually people like to win at Arena by playing 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, and Muster for Battle beats the first 1, 2, and 3 that you played. So anything that the Paladin plays in addition to that is going to be more that he has on the board and generally wins the game instantaneously. So what can be better than that? The answer is Malkorok. The confidence level it gave me is 95% that it's between like 100 to 180 points, and Muster for Battle is like 130. So it is likely that the card, based on the limited statistics, it is limited because it's a warrior card, it's a legendary, and there hasn't been that many drafts in this expansion yet, that it is maybe likely better than Muster for Battle, thus being the best card in Arena. So why is that? Well, if you compare it to Arathi Weaponsmith, which is one of the best warrior cards in Arena before that, you scale it up. If you get a really bad weapon, it's basically like a Arathi Weaponsmith. It has slightly less stats, but as you guys know, minions that cost less mana are generally going to have better stats for their mana cost, so it's basically the same stats when you get a bad result off Malkorok, but when you get a good result off Malkorok, like, some of the really powerful weapons out there, that is pretty crazy. Yes, sometimes you're going to get a Cursed Blade, but Arena follows the wild format, and there's a lot more weapons than what you might be experiencing if you're playing Malkorok in your standard decks, plus more and more weapons are going to be released, thus kind of saturating that a little bit lower. So Malkorok might just be the king of Arena. Hope you guys have enjoyed my card review. Maybe I've influenced some of your future decisions, and maybe I've shaped the way you think about the Arena meta moving forward, so maybe you'll perform a little bit better. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in a little bit.